Hey World Civilizations, Mr. Lassiter with you, and today we're going to be looking more at the end of the Second World War. We're going to be talking about peace and how peace comes about and the decisions that are made at the end of this war. However, this peace comes with the start of a new type of war, what we call the Cold War, and we'll be getting into that here over the next few days. So let's take a look at our video goals. The Allies, when planning the post-war world, had a lot of agreements and disagreements. So we're going to try to find out what those were. Of course, Germany and Japan had to be dealt with following the war, and so we will see how that goes. And then also look at some of the tensions that arise at the end of World War II between the Allies. So let's go ahead and get started looking at this post-war world and the planning for it. If you recall, the United States, Great Britain, and Soviet Union had met several times. It actually started before the U.S. even enters the war with the Atlantic Charter, when FDR meets with Winston Churchill in Newfoundland in Canada in August of 1941. But all three, the big three as they were known, the United States, Great Britain, and Soviet Union, led by Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin, respectively, meet at the Tehran Conference in Iran in November 1943 to make some decisions about the post-war world, unconditional surrender, and the division of Germany. And then they meet again, as you heard in your video with Mr. Guilford, at the Yalta Conference in February of 1945. Well, in July of 1945, they meet one last time, these big three, except this conference is going to have a little bit of a different flair to it. FDR died in office in April of 1945, and so his vice president, Harry S. Truman, takes over. Also, the new elections in Great Britain were about to bring a new prime minister to power, Clement Attlee. And so he attends with Winston Churchill as they wait out the election results. But this conference begins under a cloud of mistrust, and that mainly stems from some of the disagreements they have at Yalta. President Truman comes in and really insists, and in fact demands, on free elections in Europe, while Joseph Stalin wants a sphere of influence over Eastern and Central Europe. He simply wants these countries to become communists, become satellites of his nation. And he actually says something to the effect of free elections in Eastern Europe would lead to anti-Soviet governments, and this we cannot allow. He needed some type of buffer between him and the West, he felt. So this is going to be one of the major disagreements. The Western forces couldn't risk starting another war with the Soviet Union and trying to prevent this dominance, so they eventually kind of have to give in to this, and they make some agreements over what countries will be allowed to be under the Soviet influence, which ones will not. They also will finalize their plans for the occupation of Germany and the surrender of Japan. Another thing the United States wants is for the Soviet Union to enter the war with Japan, and in exchange, the Soviets demand some territory and some railroads that run through Manchuria and some islands that the Japanese held. So these are all the talks that are going on at Potsdam. So peace in Europe comes in May of 1945, shortly before the Potsdam Conference, after nearly 6 years of fighting. And at the end of this war, we see Nazi war criminals removed from power in Germany. Many are prosecuted in what become known as the Nuremberg trials. And Germany will lose a quarter of its pre-war territory. It was divided also into zones of occupation by the Allies, and we'll look at this on the next slide. Another agreement is that these countries will form a United Nations. So this is like a beefed up version of the League of Nations. It will have a role in human rights. It will have the United States and Soviet Union as a part of it, and it will also have its own peacekeeping forces. And its goal is to maintain peace in the world, collective security in the world. Eastern and Central Europe do fall under communist control or influence, as you can see in this map here. You can see the countries that make up the USSR, as well as the satellite nations, including Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. And Western Europe was propped up by the United States. And as we'll look at in future videos, the U.S. gave lots of money to Western Europe to rebuild it after World War II and to prevent communism from spreading there. The biggest change we see in the map of Europe, though, after World War II is the division of Germany into West Germany and East Germany. And if you look at the map on the left here, you see the zones of occupation, the green, blue, and yellow zones. These make up West Germany. And this was the democratic half of Germany. Each of the zones of occupation was run by democratic allies, Great Britain, France, and the United States. Whereas the red half here, the eastern half of Germany, was controlled by the Soviet Union. And this was the compromise reached at how Germany would be divided in order to prevent another struggle. If you look within East Germany, though, we have the capital of Germany, which is Berlin. And Berlin was divided pretty much along the same idea. East Berlin became the Soviet sector, and West Berlin was divided among the French, the British, and the Americans. Berlin is going to become one of our sources of early tension between the Soviets and Western Europe, with what's going to be called the Berlin Blockade and, of course, the building of the Berlin Wall. Also on this map, you can see Potsdam there, where the Potsdam Conference took place. Peace with Japan came a little bit later in the year. It came in August of 1945, and as you've learned, it followed the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan agreed to the terms of unconditional surrender that the Potsdam Conference had laid out, and victory in Japan was proclaimed on August 15th. The Japanese, though, in agreeing to this unconditional surrender, had made basically a bargain that Emperor Hirohito would remain as emperor. The only thing is he had to renounce being a god, which many people in Japan saw him as. So it was this thing called the Humanity Declaration that he issues in 1946. The Allies, led by, of course, the United States, then began their occupation of Japan, similar to what we see in Germany. But this will be mostly dominated by the U.S. In the future. Areas that were formerly controlled by Japan, we will see fall into turmoil. In China, before World War II broke out, there was a war between Mao Zedong and his communists and the Republic of China under Chiang Kai-shek, and so that war will rage right after the Japanese are forced out of China and Mao Zedong will come to power. In Korea, we see it divided between zones of influence. U.S. in South Korea and the Soviet Union in North Korea. And still to this day, North Korea is a communist nation. The U.S. will also insist on the reduction of course, the Japanese military, and Japan will then put basically a lot of their focus on industry, and so will remain a major industrial power in the world. With all these disagreements, though, between the United States and USSR, there was this air of mistrust between the two governments. And after this war, we really see two major superpowers, the United States of America and the Soviet Union. And so their disagreements, especially over mistrust over issues of self-determination, whether countries can determine whether or not they're democratic or communist on their own, mistrust over atomic weapons. For example, at Potsdam, President Truman did not tell Joseph Stalin directly about the atomic bomb. He said there was a weapon of unparalleled destruction. Of course, Great Britain had known about this weapon all the way through its development, pretty much. And the Soviet Union was kept in the dark. So that leads to some mistrust between our nations. And of course, post-war motives, the idea of are these Western countries trying to spread and topple communism, or is communism trying to spread and topple democracy? These were major tensions that were existing in the world. These political cartoons show it pretty well. On the left, we have the USSR's version of things. The United States and Western powers are trying to squeeze out the USSR through these other nations. Whereas the United States sees it as, the big communist bear trying to take over the world. This divide in this what we call bipolar world of the West versus Soviet communism, Winston Churchill coins a term for it, this divide, and he calls it the Iron Curtain. And he warns that this divide between communist-dominated Eastern Europe and democratic Western Europe will be the new struggle for the generation. And so this term Iron Curtain represents not, of course, a physical curtain, but a metaphorical divide that cannot be penetrated, and will certainly be one of the largest and most important speeches at the beginning of this Cold War. All right. Take a look at your video goals. Sorry, I dragged on a little bit. Also, take a look at this chart on World War II deaths. I think it's pretty telling how this war not only affected the military, but civilians, especially in places like the Soviet Union, China, Poland, and Germany. And the sheer numbers, especially the numbers of deaths in the Soviet Union and China and Germany during this war. If you can't answer these video goals, go back and watch it again.